Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z Martin, and today we are talking about finding purpose in chaos, something that the Winchesters did a lot. But before we dive into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Susan.
Well, I'm Susan Nylander. I teach English at Barstow College out off of Route 66 in the high desert of SoCal. And I have contributed to some supernatural papers and supernatural collections. And I'm a supernatural scholar deep down in my heart.
Travis.
Hi, my name is Travis Adams. I am a Marine veteran and a social worker, and I specialize in working with veterans with PTSD and substance use problems, and I use pop culture to help in their recovery.
Very good. Lynn.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynn Zubernis. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor at Winchester University, and a lot of my research is on being a fan and fan psychology, and a lot of that is about supernatural fandom. My last two books were written with the actors and the fans of that show. They are Family Don't End with Blood, Pretty Cover, and There Will Be Peace When You Are Done, which focuses on what the legacy of that show is for its actors and its fans.
Absolutely. And I'm Gail Z Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, but the modern worlds are all one Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I was fortunate to be able to contribute a chapter to There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. And I run the Supernatural TFWNC fan group here on Facebook, and I'm a writer for the Winchester Family Business. So when I fell down the rabbit hole, I went whole hog, and here we are. But let's talk about this whole idea of finding purpose in chaos. The Winchesters' lives are pretty darn chaotic. And what seems to guide Dean through is that saving people, hunting things, the family business, or as he tells Sam another time, you know, let's raise some hell and kill some sons of bitches, some evil sons of bitches. And that's his guiding star. How does that work to get you through a life as chaotic as the Winchesters? Travis.
Yeah, I think that having purpose and a reason to get up every day is really what pushes us forward. And for Dean wanting to save everybody and take care of things and kill all the monsters, that's a reason to get up out of bed or off the floor if he passed out drunk, right? Like it's a reason to continue fighting the fight. I find when people lose their sense of purpose or meaning in their life, they tend to really slow down and usually cut their lives pretty short, actually.
Okay. Lynn?
Yeah, no, I think we as humans find it really difficult to persist through difficult times if we don't have a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose in their life. I think there's nothing that feels worse to a human than being like, well, what's it all about? What am I even here for? What am I supposed to be doing here? We really instinctively need to find meaning, and we're motivated to find meaning. I think too that I agree that what you just articulated was a big part of the purpose that Dean finds in life. But I think too, you know, I'm not always the biggest John Winchester fan, but one of the things that I think John did that was so instrumental in helping his sons get through just unbelievable amounts of stuff in the 15 years we watched them persist through all kinds of things is he really instilled in them also such a strong sense of family, and that you do things for your family. You make sure your family is okay. Your loyalty is to your family, and as long as you have family, that gives you purpose. So I think I do agree that he also, you know, wanted to do that for the greater good for humanity, save the world, the big sort of purpose. But I think it was much stronger for Sam and Dean because it was so personal. As long as the other one was there, they had purpose and a reason to go on. The times we really saw them struggle and kind of lose their path and lose that sense of meaning was when they lost the other one. And then we did see them flounder sometimes.
Susan.
Absolutely. I agree with Lynn about John giving them their mission, giving them their purpose, and setting them on the path that gave their whole life meaning. It reminded me a little bit too of the episode when Dean becomes Death, and Tessa tells him, sometimes people ask questions, like, what's it all mean? And so when Dean gets confronted with that, what's it all mean? The only thing he can come up with is, a Kansas song, right? Dust in the wind. That's all we are. And so I think that Sam's obviously the cerebral guy and I think a lot of those things, but Dean's not a slacker in that department either. And I don't know how much he goes into the whys for what they do. Why do they do these things other than just to kill those, as you say, evil sons of bitches, as he said, or to kill, getting up and kill as many of them as they can, and to keep saving people, hunting things. But I don't know that the why is quite as important for Dean as it is for Sam. Sam, when like Lynn said, when they separate, when they split, when they when Dean was in purgatory, Sam goes off the trail and he stops hunting and he finds this other life. And I think that was part of Sam looking at the why and saying, why am I even doing this anymore? So I think Sam lost the purpose, lost the mission without Dean.
And you led perfectly into the next question, which was, Dean's all about saving people, hunting things. Sam's purpose, as he articulates it, shifts a bit over the course of 15 years. What do you think drives Sam? Travis?
I do think that a lot of it is like what John instilled in them with family and wanting to take care and protect other things. And I think for him, getting brought back in by losing his girlfriend gave him like a more personal message, right? Like his mom died because of him, technically, like if we go trace it back, and then his girlfriend dies. So that's why he does it. That's why he gets back into it. And what keeps him there is Dean and Bobby and Cass, and I think that that's what really helps him, and being able to see those relationships and those family dynamics that they save outside of themselves, seeing that couple or those kids be saved by the work they do gives him purpose, because he does want to help people. He wants to be a lawyer to help people.
Okay. How about you, Lynn?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I was going to say, I do think kind of the through line for Sam is that he has wanted to kind of make a difference and help people, originally hunting with his family, and he absorbed some of that. But also when he went to law school, we don't really know what kind of lawyer he wanted to be, but I think we're all assuming that, he wanted to be the kind of lawyer who's going to change the world for the better and not some other kind of lawyer. So I think that is a through line. But I also think it's interesting, I've said this many times, but one of the things that I love about the show is that it's never black and white. It's always very complicated and very nuanced. And there are times over the course of the show for both the brothers and for some of the other characters too, where their sense of purpose is not so noble, where their sense of purpose and what drives them to keep going is something like revenge. Sam, certainly there are whole character arcs for him where he is driven by revenge. And sometimes that really backfires on him. And that's a little bit of a cautionary tale. I think he always comes out on the other end to wanting to do good and, make change in the world. But there are times when his motivation is not that. He, like Dean, is very human and painted as flawed. And I like that.
Well, and we've heard Dean give that speech about revenge doesn't change anything to Cole, and in some other cases where he was talking to somebody else that you could really see he saw himself in, and it was like, no, don't go that route. It doesn't go where you think it's going to going. So yeah, there is that awareness. Susan, what about you? Where do you think, what's Sam's purpose?
Well, it's interesting that we kind of think about what kind of lawyer Sam might have been. And that kind of reminds me of, I think it was Azazel in the dream that tells him you are on your way to being a corporate douchebag lawyer or whatever in a McMansion. And, you were turning soft and we needed to pull you back into the fight. And so I think it is interesting to think about what kind of lawyer, obviously we can't believe anything Azazel says, but for the most part, but it's interesting that he sums up what Sam was going to do with his life had he taken that path and stayed on that path, had Dean never shown up, or had he not reconnected, or had Jessica survived whatever the attack was. But those roads not taken, I don't know what Sam would have, although we find out he does like organic food and farmers markets and all of that when he does that year or so with Amelia. And
thank God for kale.
Right, kale, yes, thank God for kale. So yeah, I think we can see hints of what maybe that would have looked like, but he always keeps getting pulled back in, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes not so much. But at the end, ultimately he tells Mary, my family hunts, that's what we do. And so, by that long route, he does finally come back around to accepting it, and as his purpose, as his reason for being in the world.
Yeah,
I just had to laugh. I just had to
Oh,
laugh because you mentioned corporate lawyer, and some might argue that's already one foot in the door with hell. So, maybe Azazel didn't need to stop him. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. That's funny. I keep thinking he wasn't going to be a corporate lawyer, but we don't really know. No, I was just going to say, Gail, you mentioned earlier, like that there was an evolution for both of them, I think, but especially for Sam, that there were some times when he really was thinking of his purpose as something other than hunting. And for a while he wanted to walk away from that. He'd seen too much death and too much darkness, and he wanted to do it in a different way. But certainly by the end of the series, he was just as invested as Dean was in hunting. And that was every bit as much his purpose as it was Dean's purpose. But both of them were clear that, it's hunting, it's what I do, but I can't do it without my brother. I don't want to do it without my brother. So it was also very much about them doing it as a team.
Throughout the series, you kind of see like Dean's eyes open up when looking at Sam. Right, we see that a few times, and the one that comes to mind talking about this is an episode, Who We Are, in season 12, when he gives the speech to all the other hunters and motivates them. And Dean's like, "No, you're the leader they need." So like that really says a lot about who he wanted to be. And like Lynn said, towards the end of the series, you really start seeing that take shape, and that's like one of the pivotal points for me when I see that.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it was the one just before that when they were in the bunker and trapped, and Sam was regretting heading down the path to believing the British men of letters. And he said it was just easier. It was easier to follow than to lead. And so I think that when we get to that speech, Travis, that's a great point, that Sam's finally, I think, coming to grips with that idea. And plus, being the little brother, he had always had to follow. He'd always had to follow John. He always had to follow Dean. He was always bossed around. And so, I don't know if that's his natural inclination was to follow, or just that it was easier. But then once he does sort of accept the leadership role, that changes him as well.
Okay. What were some of the points of chaos where the brothers, one or together, looked for a way to hang on to a purpose. We've mentioned, when Jessica died and that pulled Sam back in because he had revenge. But what were some of the others? Travis?
I mean, the original one, right, with the pilot is when you see Mary go up in flames, and like that gets John and then the boys sequentially down. But even thinking about like Dean trying to help Sam with his soul and really trying to like kind of have that wall put up by death, and trying to figure out how to keep that from him while still hunting and still being the person that he wants to be, trying to hide it. And then, Sam is a more efficient hunter. He doesn't need to sleep. He just keeps going and going and going. And for me, like that role for Dean really says a lot about who he is and what he's doing when we're coming to like chaos, right? His brother's falling apart. His brother's not the person he thought he was, and he still loves him and wants him to be there.
Okay. How about you, Lynn?
Yeah, I was going to talk about Soulless Sam too. I was thinking of it in a little bit of a different way. I think, there were so many things that caused chaos. There was the apocalypse multiple times. There was the darkness. I mean, chaos is chaos is what Supernatural is all about. But in some ways, the chaos that caused the most disruption to Sam and Dean were when something took their brother away from them in some way. Maybe not dead, maybe not gone, but like when Sam was soulless, he was right there with Dean, but he wasn't. And Dean knew that he wasn't, that something was off. Or when Dean had the mark of Cain. So he was still there hunting with Sam, but he wasn't the same. And they couldn't, their brother is such a bedrock for them, like a port in a storm, like the thing they anchor themselves around, so that no matter how much chaos is swirling around them, they have that other person who they trust with their life and they know has their back. So I think the times that were hardest for them, and probably if they were real people would feel most chaotic, are the times when they didn't have their brother as that anchor post, because there was something that made their brother not able to be that soulless or mark of Cain or a demon Dean or something like that. And it's interesting, it almost translates over to the actors too. Like Jared and Jensen have talked about many times how they came to count on each other and know that everything was seamless between the two of them because they had worked together for so long, and that those storylines were really hard for them because they didn't have their, essentially their brother to lean on in the same way. So it's interesting that chaotic feeling even carried over into real life a little bit.
Oh, I can see that, because especially, it's hard as an author to write a section of the book where the characters are not doing something good or where bad things are happening, and you have to live with that in your head and live with it for months. And that's just with your head. You're not doing the full body immersion into bringing these characters to life and breath through your body. So they talk about character bleed. I don't know why it doesn't happen more, because I would think that would be really hard to go home and go, okay, I'm taking this person off like a suit, and I'm going to hang them here by the door, and then I'll put them back on in the morning. Because, writers wake up in the middle of the night with plot points. So that amazes me. But, one of the times that was very chaotic was Mystery Spot. And if you look at it, that Sam first has this mission to stop Dean dying every day. And then he accomplishes that, only it's even worse because Dean is now dead. And then he has the mission for vengeance. And I love Gabriel's comment that whoever thinks Dean is the dangerous one has never seen you with a sharp object in your hand. Because Sam has no other reason to go on except, since he can't save Dean, to avenge him. And that becomes a very dangerous purpose in all that chaos. Any thoughts about Mystery Spot in particular? Because that one was pure chaos.
I love that. And I love what that shows us about Sam, because I think sometimes Dean's sort of absolute devotion to Sam and how much he needs Sam as an anchor and how much Sam is his purpose for going on is made more obvious, more overt in the story, and Sam's is not as obvious. But boy, in that episode, that's exactly what that episode was all about. And that episode really showed it is at least as intense for Sam as it is for Dean, because just in that little montage, we saw what he became without his brother there, and it was chilling. He was like an automaton, like a killing machine. And I mean, he's ready to kill Bobby even. I mean, that is, he went very, very dark. Part of that remembering Mystery Spot and feeling like that told us so much about Sam was why I struggled with the Amelia storyline so much, because the way he reacted to losing Dean in Mystery Spot was so different from the way he reacted to losing Dean in the season with Amelia, although I was convinced for most of that season that he actually had a mental break and this was all a hallucination, which that made perfect sense to me, but I still think that's what they were going to do, and then they changed their mind mid-season.
That is canon, and I think you were right. And I think they might have decided to use his guilt from that to drive him to extremes in season 10 to get rid of the Mark of Cain. But yeah, I agree. That seemed very out of character. I've always said that when Dean loses Sam, Dean becomes self-destructive. When Sam loses Dean, Sam burns down the world.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody who questions the depth of their bond to each other because they react in different ways hasn't been paying attention, because you're right, Sam is actually scarier.
And he gets way more efficient too, right? The way that he organizes all the weapons in the trunk, how they all have form-fitting foam. You know, he's just like, go, go, go. He doesn't mess around, where Dean's like, I'll grab this and this and this, and let's go. You know, Sam is efficient. And you see that a lot when he doesn't have his soul.
He was very channeling John in that way. You know, I mean, the trunk was so perfectly, just like John's, was in the truck. So is Sam's when he gets it all lined up and organized that way. But yes, and use the perfect word, Lynn, automaton. He really had that very single mindset. But it was also, I think it gave us, I'm sure they weren't even thinking that far ahead, but it really gave us a glimpse of soulless Sam. You know, it kind of telegraphed what we were going to be seeing with soulless Sam, because he becomes that machine and can be a killing machine. So I think that as soft as his heart can get, it can also flip the other way. And like Lynn was saying, you know, when he's deprived of his other half, of Dean, you know, don't want to mess with him.
Well, and if you think about it, by the end of the series, the boys had to have been close to the age John was at the beginning of the series. And John certainly, he knew how to be a soldier and he knew how to be a husband. And since he couldn't be a husband, he'd go back to being a soldier, and only a different kind of war. And I think that it's kind of funny, because I can imagine at that age, Sam and Dean looking at themselves in the mirror one day and go, holy crap, I really did become my dad. Because everybody has those midlife moments, good and bad.
That's why I one of the things that I loved so much about the finale of Supernatural is that ultimately Sam does respond to like the ultimate chaos, the loss of Dean, in a different way. He does manage to hang on to his soul and to hang on to his humanity and to walk away from hunting and to raise a family in order to do what his brother's kind of last wish for him was. So he does break that pattern. He does not turn into John Winchester. He says, no, I'm not going to just turn into this automaton, this hunter, that's not going to be all of my life. And I think that, I mean, they both had such a beautiful and striking evolution. And I love that that's Sam's evolution in the end.
Well, and two other times that we saw them kind of in opposing roles on dealing with chaos. One was when Dean disappears at the end of season 8 and goes to purgatory. And Dean talks about the constant chaos in purgatory as being pure. He had a purpose. He knew what his purpose was. There was nothing else good, but he had a purpose. Where Sam really didn't. How exciting is it to fix motel air conditioners? I mean, you know, it's nice. You appreciate when yours works, but it's not exactly on the same scale as saving the world. And then the end, when Dean lost his Sam to Lucifer and becomes one scary mofo without Sam to keep him human. So any thoughts about those two situations and how sometimes you can find a little too much purpose perhaps in chaos?
Well,
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, it makes you think about service members today and how they always want to go back overseas and go back into the fight because it's easy and intense, and your body readjusts to this whole new level of adrenaline. Just go, go, go. And that's where Dean was while in purgatory. And yeah, his life was simplified. Kill everything except for Benny, right? Like pretty much is go, go, go. And super scary, very easy. And that's what a lot of veterans deal with is life is easier when you know that it's just life or death. I don't have to worry about credit cards. I don't have to worry about bills. I don't have to worry about my air conditioner not working. I don't have an air conditioner. I live in the forest. So like that's what makes me think about when especially now that I like reflect back on that season.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't remember what episode it was, but you know, they got bad news again about something, and Dean said, you know, oh well, another apocalypse. It must be Tuesday or something along those lines, because it does become a regular thing, and it becomes almost a reason in and of itself. The chaos itself becomes a reason to get up every day, and just to live in that chaos almost becomes that reason to be vertical. And I think that sometimes Dean falls into that trap of expecting chaos. He's never going to expect things to go well. I don't think he ever does. I think he always expects chaos.
I can see, like, you know, purgatory is obviously an extreme example. Most of us are not gonna, I don't think, have to deal with life in purgatory. But I hope not anyway. But I react that way when there's too much chaos. And I mean, I think we all do. When I feel really overwhelmed with so many things that I have to do, and I have to call this person and get that repaired and pay this bill and file my taxes, and oh no, I didn't do that lecture, and I can tend to just want to tunnel vision onto something and say, I can't think about any of that now. I have to write this article, and I can't do anything else till I write this article. And that tunnel vision in the moment, if you're in too much chaos, feels good. That was purgatory. That's what happens to real life people when they want to go back to the combat zone. You know, when you can just tunnel vision into that one thing, weirdly, it's less stressful because you're just shutting out everything else and just concentrating on that one thing. And I can do it to a fault. You know, if I have something, I can say, oh, I'm just going to write this article. And then I literally will write that article all day long and not do the 12 other things that were on the to-do list for that day. And that's not actually a good thing, but it's when I'm too overwhelmed and I can no longer multitask. I have to just hone in on one thing.
I told somebody once that I am extremely good at dropping the fire doors when it gets like that and just tunnel visioning. And they just looked at me and said, you do realize that's a trauma response, right? It's like, let me look into that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But speaking of which, and we've talked about it on some other panels, the responses that are learned under fire or in a bad place that let you survive that chaos, if you carry them out of the chaos with you, tend not to work real well in non-chaotic times. And that's really hard to let go of. No, this saved my life. This saved my mental life. How can I let that go? And yet it's usually sabotaging you in the nice, normal civilian, these people don't know about monsters world.
Yeah.
And we've seen that happen to the boys.
I'll say our brains like to go from like A to B to C. And my brain starts paying attention. Like every time I walk out in the street, if I have a weapon on me, I came back every time. So I must need to have a weapon on me every time. And it becomes that habit. And then you forget that depending on your location, you probably don't need a weapon as much as you would in other locations, right? You probably don't need a weapon in San Diego as much as you do in Purgatory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even Dean, you know, when they go into that bank and Sam gives him a hard time because he goes in with the knife down tucked into his boot, and he said, "I'm not walking in here naked." So, you know, so yeah, Dean, I think, was very much that way. If he didn't have some kind of weapon on him, he wasn't going to do well. I think he just had to be armed in some way, shape, or form.
And it meant that they had to be psychologically armed also. So an ongoing sort of battle that they had with themselves and each other was how much vulnerability could you allow yourself to show? How much could you even talk to someone else about something that was bothering you, even if it was your brother? I love the scene. One of my favorite scenes is just a little scene with Sam and Rowena, where they are talking about their experiences being traumatized by Lucifer. And Sam says, you know I could talk to Dean about this. I know he would listen. I know he would even get it. He's been to hell too. Strangely, they've both had similar traumas. And yet he can't bring himself to do it. It just requires so much vulnerability. And it's just a stilted little conversation. But in that conversation, I feel like they both validate each other just in the amount that they're able to share about their own ongoing terror and PTSD over what happened with Lucifer. And that is healing for them. And the Winchesters don't allow themselves a lot of that. I feel like John very much sort of modeled that is not what you do. That is dangerous. You don't go there. You just get out your gun and go shoot something. And that's what you do. So yeah, I think what you said, Gail, is really right. That comes from living through so much trauma, and some of those strategies don't work very well in other areas of your life. Again, another thing I love about the finale, Dean really might be the 11th hour literally, but Dean really opens up and lets himself be emotionally vulnerable. And there was build up to that. It didn't come out of nowhere. So I think they made progress. That was a lifelong struggle for both of them.
Yeah, I love how in season, like one of Charlie's last episodes, she even hits him like, stop not telling your brother stuff. It's clear, like all your problems are because you two don't talk. So stop it.
She says that too. That was something, oh, I don't know, 3 or 4 conversations back that we just had. It reminded me of when Charlie said, there's pretty much nothing the Winchester boys can't do if they work together. And so, you know, that when we talk about them being separate, even Charlie notices that, having, you know, read all of Chuck's books. So, you know, she recognizes that as well, that, yeah, they need to be together in order to really do the impossible.
Well, and Kevin Tran's ghost tells them, would you guys just start talking to each other? I'm here. I see you. And, you know, at that juncture, they don't. Now, one of the biggest periods of chaos was seasons 4 and 5, when you're really in the thick of their first apocalypse. One would hope that subsequent apocalypses, you've got experience and you can say, oh, I remember the last time the world ended, we did this, if you're a Winchester. But you had a couple of different responses to chaos. You had Sam's initial response to Dean being dragged to hell by going into vengeance again and justifying the demon blood addiction because he was still saving people, hunting things. He was doing something useful and vengeful. And the whole Lilith quest. You had Dean wanting absolution for what he did in hell, and so having a really hard time turning down the angels who saw something good in him when he didn't see anything good in himself. And you had the two of them not recognizing that they were, you know, Sam's got the demon blood, Dean's got the whiskey. They're both not coping optimally to the same chaos. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's another example of the thing that I kind of started out talking about. They're not on the same page for much of that time. They are sometimes literally, I mean, even physically fighting, not on the same page. And I think that keeps them spinning for a lot longer than they would have otherwise, because they don't have the support of their brother. They're not on the same page. They are at cross purposes. And I think that makes it a lot harder for them to come to a resolution of what are they going to do and how are they going to confront this problem. I mean, and at the end of season 5, that ends up with Swan Song. It's a tragic ending, because they made their way back to sort of being on the same page, but all of that time when they weren't really set the stage for a pretty desperate ending as the only one that they could have. So I think that just reiterates again that when the Winchesters don't have each other, when they're not on the same page, bad things happen. It's like Charlie and Kevin and everyone else said, when they're a team, there's nothing they can't accomplish. But when they're at cross purposes, it doesn't go well.
Well, and I think the standard line is, I'm fine. The standard line is, I'm fine. It's never, they won't ask for help. They won't show that vulnerability. But yeah, I mean, the very first, I'm fine. They got a gut wound. I'm fine. It's a standard operating procedure with them.
That's why the finale was so striking with Dean's, "No, stay with me. Please stay with me." I was just like, what? Wow. What a huge change to be able to say that and ask for what he needs from his brother.
Yeah, I mean, even Dean, the quote is like, I swear if one more person asks if I'm okay, I'm gonna start throwing punches, right? Like he's tired of being asked constantly. And you mentioned Swan Song, Lynn, and it makes me think about so much there. Like when Dean is just getting the crap kicked out of him. He's like, "You're my brother, and I know you're in there, and I love you." But the other piece of that episode that's kind of like the yin to the yang of what we're talking about here is the narration by Chuck talking about how the boys will take time off. They'll drive thousands of miles to go to a game or to watch a concert or park in the middle of the nowhere to watch the stars. Like I love that piece that they throw that in there in the midst of all this conflict.
Now we're coming up to the end of our time, but there's one more person in chaos that we haven't touched on, and that is how Benny navigated coming back into the modern world. Dean and Sam kind of started to get a routine for coming back from the dead, sort of like having a packing list for vacation. Check on your soul, make sure you know where you left your gun. After the first or second time, you get a rhythm. But this was Benny's first time coming back, and he walked back in on a lot of chaos, and it threw him for a big loop. And his purpose seemed to be family. It didn't always go so well. Thoughts on that?
But he's always been in the middle anyway. He's kind of a hybrid, he's not fully human, not fully vampire in a way, I mean, at least psychologically, I don't think he's fully vampire. He wants to be, and certainly the bond he has with Dean when they're in purgatory. So when he comes back and he talks about not being a good fit, that he lives in that liminal in between space on this trip back. So I think that's Sam notices, when I don't think he wanted to come back, when he turned Sam down for the ride back out. And so I think, yeah, he doesn't do well in a normal, well, however normal it can be for a vampire. I mean, he does try to adjust with the blood bags and the whole, trying to stay away from people, but everything keeps dragging him back in. So I think, yeah, he struggled a lot with that.
I think
He
he
wanted to go back
also,
to sure. Oh, sorry.
oh, sorry, Susan.
Go ahead. No, I
just
wanted to go
I
back.
was just
to
going to
the
say, I think he also really kind of is an illustration of that theme that we've been talking about, because family is really important to Benny too. First, his blood family, his niece, but also, you know, the family that he created with the vampires that he originally was with, the woman that he was in love with, etc. But when he comes back, he can't pick up with any of those. He can't reestablish any of those bonds at all. So while family is a motivating force for Benny and part of his purpose, he comes back to find that those bonds are cut off from him. So he no longer has that purpose anymore. And he recognizes that Dean can go back to his family. Dean can have Sam, and he doesn't want to stand in the way of that. You know, when Dean says, what'll it take for us to, you know, be brothers again? And Sam says, well, for you to be done with him. Like Benny has to go. And I think Benny does value family, and he cares about Dean. And so he's willing to literally put himself out of the picture and go back to purgatory so Dean can have family, because he recognizes he can't have it himself. The Benny story is so tragic. It's one of the most tragic stories in Supernatural. And I think Ty Olsson just did such an amazing job with that we all came to care about Benny, even in the small number of episodes that he was in. Truly tragic.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Travis?
I mean, I was gonna say something along the same lines as Lynn. You know, when they come back and then Dean kind of ghosts him and starts like not paying attention and says like, hey, listen, we got to stop. You know, that breaks Benny's heart because he came back to be with his friend who could be family, right? Like family don't end in blood. And we can keep this going, but Dean chose Sam over him, understandably so, because of the relationship that those two have. But unfortunately, Benny was the innocent bystander in that.
Yeah. Well, folks, as usual, the time has gone so quickly and we are at the end of it. So before we wrap up, let's let everybody say where people can find you online, starting with Lynn.
You can find me on all social media at Fangasm SPN, and you can find the most recent 2 books that were written with the cast and fans of Supernatural at the website peacewhenyouaredone.com.
Awesome. Travis?
You can find me on different panels and stuff at various conventions. I've contributed to a series of books. Here's some of them right here. But right now my social media is kind of getting a little tweaked. But I did want to say one quote really quick also from season 12. It's from Castiel, the episode First Blood. You know, this world, this sad, doomed little world, it needs you. It needs every last Winchester it can get, and I won't let you die. I won't let any of you die, and I won't let you sacrifice yourselves. You mean too much to me, to everything.
Yeah, that kind of says it all. Susan?
It really does. Thank you, Gail. I am at SOOZE105 at Twitter. Also, my writing partner, Mandy, we have another call for papers out there. We're looking to do an edited collection on women in Supernatural. We also have Death in Supernatural that is available at McFarland Publishing and at Amazon Publishing. I think our Twitter too, you can find us at Women in Supernatural on Twitter as well. So please check out our call for papers. It's on UPenn.
Awesome. And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. My websites are thosenames.com. All of my social media is pretty much those names on just about every platform that's out there. I mentioned running the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook, as well as writing for the Winchester Family Business. But most of the time you can find me here on Continual. So thank you so much for another wonderful conversation. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon on Continual, so we'll see you online.